Gang members circled a homeless woman in the rain as she shielded 3 tiny puppies with her own body, their fists raised, their laughter cruel. What they didn't know was that a Navy SEAL and his combat-trained German Shepherd were watching from the shadows. And in 60 seconds, their world would collapse into a nightmare they couldn't escape. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you want to support the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. The October rain fell like cold needles across Port Angeles, Washington, turning the streets into rivers of gray that reflected nothing but the dying light of an indifferent sky. The small coastal town huddled between the Olympic National Forest and the Strait of Juan de Fuca, isolated by geography and forgotten by progress, where the smell of salt and pine mixed with diesel fumes from fishing boats that returned each evening with lighter holds and heavier debts. The wind came off the water in gusts that bent the hemlock trees and rattled the windows of weathered houses, carrying with it the promise of winter storms that would arrive early this year, as if nature itself sensed something dark gathering in this place where the vulnerable had nowhere left to hide. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Dalton stood at the window of his rented cabin, watching that rain batter the glass with the same mechanical intensity that had worn down his ability to sleep through the night. At 38 years old, he carried his 6'2" frame with the economy of motion that came from 15 years as a Navy SEAL, every gesture calculated, every movement serving a purpose. His dark brown hair showed gray at the temples now, premature aging from sand and blood, and the kind of decisions that left scars deeper than a visible line along his left jawline. His eyes, a pale blue that seemed washed out by things they'd witnessed, maintained a constant scan of his surroundings, never settling, always cataloging threats that existed only in the hyper-vigilant corners of his trained mind. He'd come to this isolated stretch of coastal Washington to disappear for 30 days of mandatory leave, to decompress from Kandahar, from the IED that had turned 3 of his team members into red mist while he'd walked away with nothing but ringing ears and the unbearable weight of command decisions replayed endlessly at 3 in the morning. The cabin sat on a bluff overlooking the strait, a single-access road cutting through dense forest, exactly the kind of defensible position a man chose when he wanted the world to forget he existed. At his feet, Thor raised his massive head, amber eyes tracking something outside that Marcus hadn't yet consciously registered. The German Shepherd weighed 95 pounds of muscle and discipline, 6 years old, 4 deployments, medically retired after catching shrapnel in his right hind leg during the same engagement that had taken Marcus's piece. The dog's black and tan coat bore scars on the right flank, testament to violence survived. And his ears swiveled with radar precision, catching sounds the rain tried to hide. "Easy," Marcus said, the single word barely more than a breath. Thor's body remained tense, a coiled spring wrapped in fur. Not a pet, a partner, a weapon with a conscience, who'd saved Marcus's life in Helmand Province by detecting an explosive vest 3 heartbeats before it would have detonated in a crowded market. They'd learned each other's language in the kind of crucible that forged bonds stronger than blood, communicating in glances and gestures, understanding that survival meant trusting the other's instincts absolutely. The cabin itself reflected Marcus's state of mind with brutal honesty. Spartan furnishings, nothing on the walls, no photographs or personal effects that suggested permanence or connection to anything beyond the immediate moment. A tactical pack sat by the door, always ready, always packed with essentials that could sustain him for 72 hours in hostile territory. Old habits, the kind that kept you breathing, but made you question whether breathing was the same as living. Marcus turned from the window, intending to start the coffee that would be his 4th cup before noon, when Thor's low growl stopped him mid-step. Not the warning rumble for wildlife or distant hikers, but the specific frequency reserved for human threats, for danger with intent. "What have you got?" Marcus moved to the dog's side, following his line of sight down the coastal road toward town. Nothing visible through the rain yet, but Thor didn't make mistakes. His ears pinned forward, body rigid, tail straight. Every line of him screamed alert. Marcus checked his watch. 10:30 on a Friday morning. He'd made exactly 1 trip into Port Angeles since arriving 4 days ago. A supply run to the grocery store on the edge of town, where he'd moved through the aisles like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, selecting items with mechanical efficiency. The kind of shopping done by someone who viewed food as fuel, and conversation as threat. The memory surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. He'd been in the canned goods aisle when he'd heard the woman's voice, quiet, apologetic, speaking to the manager with an accent that softened her consonants. "I just need 3 cans. I have money." The rustle of coins, counted carefully. $2.37. That's enough for 3 cans of the small ones, yes? Marcus had glanced over despite himself. She was small, maybe 5'4", with weathered brown skin and gray-streaked black hair pulled into a practical braid. Probably 50-something, though hardship aged people in ways that made calendars irrelevant. Her clothes were worn but clean, layered against the cold, and her hands trembled slightly as she counted the coins again on the counter. Arthritic fingers, manual labor hands. The manager, a heavy man with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile, shook his head. "No food stamp card, no sale, store policy. But I have money. Company doesn't want cash transactions under $5. Attracts the wrong element." His eyes made clear which element he meant. The woman's shoulders had sagged, and she'd gathered her coins with a dignity that somehow made the rejection more cruel. As she'd turned to leave, Marcus had seen the silver cross around her neck catching the fluorescent light, and something in her expression, resigned but unbroken, had made him speak before his isolation instinct could stop him. "Those cans." He'd nodded to the dog food she'd been trying to buy. "Add them to mine." Her eyes had widened. "No, senor, I cannot. Already done." He'd placed 3 of the larger cans in his basket, then added 6 more. "Thor needs the extra protein anyway." Thor, who'd been sitting in perfect heel position, had tilted his head at the lie, but remained silent. The woman had whispered a prayer of gratitude, crossing herself, then disappeared into the rain before Marcus could feel awkward about the interaction. He'd paid, loaded his truck, and driven back to isolation, telling himself it was a one-time aberration, a moment of weakness in the armor he'd built between himself and a world that seemed determined to hurt anyone who couldn't defend themselves. Now, 4 days later, Thor's growl pulled him back to the present. Marcus grabbed his jacket and the tactical flashlight that could double as a striking weapon if necessary. Not because he intended to go looking for trouble, just a look, just to be sure. The kind of reconnaissance that had become reflexive, the inability to ignore his dog's warnings about threats he couldn't yet see. "Come," he said quietly, and Thor moved to his side instantly, matching his pace as they stepped into the rain that fell like the sky itself had given up trying. The rain hammered down with the kind of relentless fury that turned October into a test of endurance. Each drop hitting the pavement like a tiny declaration that nature didn't care about human comfort or survival. Marcus drove his pickup truck down the coastal highway toward Port Angeles, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Thor, sitting rigid in the passenger seat with his nose pressed against the window glass. The dog's body language screamed tension, every muscle coiled. A low whine escaping his throat that Marcus had learned to interpret as extreme agitation. "Easy, boy," Marcus said, though his own pulse had kicked up several notches. Thor didn't react to weather. Something else had triggered this response. The highway curved along the coastline before cutting inland through dense forest, and as Marcus approached the turnoff for the industrial district, Thor's whine became a sharp bark, his paw scratching against the door. Marcus had learned long ago not to ignore his partner's instincts. He took the exit. The industrial area of Port Angeles existed in that forgotten space between progress and decay, where canneries that once employed hundreds now stood empty, with shattered windows and rusted equipment, where warehouses advertised space for lease with faded signs nobody bothered to remove when the businesses failed. The Highway 101 overpass cut through this landscape like a concrete scar, creating shadowed spaces underneath, where society's invisible population sought shelter from rain and judgment. Marcus slowed the truck as he approached the overpass, and Thor's barking became frantic. Then he saw them. Under the concrete shelter, illuminated by the gray light filtering through the rain, a woman knelt on the ground with her body curved protectively over something Marcus couldn't quite see. 3 men surrounded her in a loose semicircle, their postures radiating threat even from a distance. One of them, tall and wiry with the jittery movements of a methamphetamine user, grabbed the woman's shoulder and jerked her backward. Marcus pulled the truck to the shoulder and killed the engine. "Stay," he commanded Thor. whose entire body vibrated with the need to intervene. The dog whined but remained seated, years of discipline overriding instinct. As Marcus stepped into the rain, the sound of it hitting his jacket mixed with raised voices carrying across the empty space. He moved quietly, using the concrete pillars as cover, old training making him a shadow among shadows. Close enough now to hear the conversation, to see details that turned his blood cold. The woman was the same one from the grocery store. Elena, he'd heard the manager call her. She knelt in a makeshift shelter constructed from cardboard and plastic tarps, and clutched against her chest were 3 small shapes that squirmed and whimpered. Puppies, maybe 8 weeks old, their eyes barely open, their cries thin and desperate. "Last chance, lady," the wiry man said, his voice tight with chemical aggression. "Hand them over or we take them and you get hurt. Please." Elena's voice shook but held firm. "They are just Babels. They have done nothing wrong." A second man, shorter but broader, with the build of someone who'd spent time in a gym before discovering easier paths to feeling powerful, laughed without humor. "Boss says no strays, no dogs, no cats, no homeless feeding them and making the place look like a dump. This whole area's getting cleaned up, and you're either gone by Monday or we make you gone." "I will go," Elena said quickly. "Monday, I promise, but please, let me find homes for the puppies first. Just a few days." The third man, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. He was bigger than the others, maybe 6'4", with a shaved head and a neck tattoo that looked Cyrillic even from Marcus's distance. When he spoke, his accent confirmed Russian origins. "No negotiation. Boss said make problem disappear today. Dogs go in the straight with rocks tied to them. You go to hospital, or you go quiet. Your choice how much it hurts." He reached for the puppies. Elena curved tighter around them, and the sound she made was somewhere between a prayer and a sob. "Please, in the name of God." The Russian's hand closed on her shoulder with visible force, and Marcus felt something snap inside his chest, a tether he'd been holding that connected restraint to action. Not his town, not his fight, not his problem, except it was. He stepped out from behind the pillar, moving into their line of sight with the kind of presence that came from walking into hostile villages where showing fear meant dying. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, calm. The kind of calm that preceded violence, like stillness before lightning. "Step back." All 3 men turned. The wiry one's hand dropped to his waistband, where Marcus could see the outline of a pistol poorly concealed. The broad one cracked his knuckles in practiced intimidation. The Russian simply stared, sizing Marcus up with the dead eyes of someone who'd done violence before and felt nothing about doing it again. "This doesn't concern you," the Russian said. "Keep walking." "Step back," Marcus repeated, not raising his voice, not moving his hands toward any weapon, just standing, just being. The broad one laughed. "You got a death wish, old man? There's 3 of us." Marcus's eyes flicked to each of them in turn, calculating distances, identifying threats, cataloging weaknesses with the automatic efficiency of a computer designed for killing. The wiry one was the immediate danger because of the gun, but he was also scared, his hand shaking slightly. The broad one was confident, but untrained, all muscle and no skill. The Russian was the real threat, someone who'd seen combat, who understood violence beyond street brawling. "Last chance," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. "Walk away." The Russian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You want to be hero? We see how that works." He nodded to the wiry one. "Derek, show him what happens to heroes in this town." Derek's hand moved toward his waistband, and that was when Thor came through the truck's open window like a fur-covered missile. 95 pounds of trained aggression covering 40 feet in less than 3 seconds. His barking transformed into something primal and terrifying that echoed off the concrete and made Derek's gun hand freeze halfway to the weapon. Thor didn't attack. He positioned himself between Marcus and the 3 men, his body low, his teeth bared, a growl rumbling from his chest that sounded like a diesel engine idling before exploding into motion. Every line of him communicated a simple message that transcended language. "Try it and die." "Call him off," the broad one said, his earlier confidence evaporating as Thor's attention focused on him with laser precision. "When you leave," Marcus replied. "Elena, can you stand?" The The woman, still clutching the puppies, nodded shakily and rose to her feet. Marcus saw her properly now in the gray light. She was older than he'd thought, maybe 52 or 53, with the kind of weathered beauty that spoke of a life spent outdoors, of hardship endured with grace. Her brown eyes met his with a mixture of terror and desperate hope, and he saw she was shivering violently, soaked through, her lips tinged with blue. The Russian took a step forward, testing. Thor's growl intensified, and the dog's muscles bunched in preparation to launch. Years of combat training, of taking down insurgents and protecting his handler, all condensed into this single moment of coiled threat. You think one dog changes things? The Russian's voice remained steady. But Marcus saw the calculation in his eyes, the reassessment. We know where you're staying. Cabin on the coastal bluff, right? Nice and isolated. Accidents happen in places like that. Marcus said nothing, just held the man's gaze with the kind of eye contact that communicated certainty. If you come for me, you won't leave. The moment stretched. Rain falling, Thor's growling, the only sound beyond the hiss of water hitting concrete. Then the Russian smiled again, this time with genuine amusement. Boss will want to know about you. We'll be seeing you again. He nodded to the others. Let's go. For now. They backed away, maintaining eye contact, then turned and walked to a black pickup truck parked 50 yards down the road. Marcus watched them leave, memorizing the license plate, cataloging details. Washington State plate. 7 Series. 3 years old. Tinted windows, illegal for state law. Professional criminals or people who thought they were. When the truck's taillights disappeared into the rain, Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe fully. 4. Befus. The German command brought the dog instantly to his side, still alert, but no longer in attack mode. Elena stood trembling, the 3 puppies whimpering against her chest. Now that the immediate danger had passed, Marcus could see them clearly. German shepherd puppies, maybe 8 weeks old, their eyes barely open, their tiny bodies shaking from cold and fear. One had a white patch on her chest. Another was darker, bigger than his siblings. The third had pale coloring with startling blue eyes. Thank you, Elena whispered. Thank you, thank you. She crossed herself with one hand while clutching the puppies with the other. God sent you. I prayed and he sent you. Marcus wasn't sure about God, but he was certain about hypothermia. Elena's lips were blue, her shivering violent enough to concern him from a medical standpoint. The puppies weren't much better, their small bodies radiating cold. You need to get warm, he said, and dry. I will be fine. I have my shelter. She gestured to the sad collection of cardboard and plastic that wouldn't protect anyone from this rain. That's not a shelter, Marcus said flatly. That's a death sentence. He made a decision that he knew would complicate the isolation he'd come here to find. But some things overrode self-preservation. My truck. Now. Senor, I cannot impose. Not asking. His tone left no room for argument, the command voice that had moved men through hostile fire. You stay out here, you die. The puppies die. Get in the truck. Elena hesitated only a moment, then nodded and followed him to the vehicle. Thor jumped in first, taking his position in the back seat, and Elena climbed into the passenger side with the puppies still clutched against her. Marcus cranked the heat to maximum and pulled back onto the highway. Where do you live? Elena asked quietly. Cabin, 10 minutes up the coast. I meant, where is your home? Marcus kept his eyes on the road, watching the rain streak across the windshield. Don't have one. The silence that followed felt heavy with unasked questions. But Elena didn't push. She just held the puppies close and whispered prayers in Spanish that Marcus recognized despite not speaking the language. Gratitude, protection, hope. Not his fight, Marcus told himself, as he drove through the rain toward a cabin that was supposed to be his escape from exactly this kind of entanglement. Not his town, not his problem, but Thor's warm breath on his neck and the sound of 3 tiny puppies whimpering, and the image of Elena curled protectively over them while 3 men threatened death, all of it combined into a weight he recognized from 1,000 missions. The moment when walking away stopped being an option, and the only question left was how much it would cost to do the right thing. The cabin appeared through the rain. isolated and defensible. And Marcus pulled into the driveway, knowing that 30 days of peace had just become something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like purpose. The cabin's interior temperature climbed slowly as Marcus turned every dial to maximum heat, the furnace. Ace groaning to life with mechanical reluctance while Elena sat wrapped in his spare wool blanket on the leather couch. The 3 puppies nestled against her chest. Thor positioned himself near the door in his default guardian stance, ears rotating to track sounds beyond the walls, his body language communicating what Marcus already knew. The threat hadn't ended, only paused. Marcus set a mug of hot coffee in front of Elena, watching her arthritic fingers wrap around the ceramic with desperate gratitude. Her shivering had decreased, but not stopped, the kind of deep cold that took hours to burn out of bone marrow. He'd seen hypothermia before, knew the stages, understood that she'd been maybe 30 minutes from the point where her body would have started shutting down non-essential systems. "Drink," he said simply, then moved to examine the puppies. They were in bad shape, underweight, dehydrated, their small bodies showing signs of neglect that made Marcus's jaw tighten. The one with the white chest patch, clearly the runt, had eyes that seemed too large for her face and ribs visible beneath thin fur. The darker male was stronger, but still weak, and the pale female with blue eyes had a cough that concerned him from a medical perspective. "How long have you had them?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice neutral, non-judgmental. Elena took a careful sip of coffee before answering. 2 weeks. I found them in a dumpster behind the restaurant on 3rd Street. Someone threw them away like garbage, still with their eyes closed. I could not leave them." Her accent softened the words, but her eyes held the kind of steel that came from making hard choices and living with them. "I am homeless, yes, but I am not heartless." "Didn't say you were." Marcus knelt to examine the pale puppy more closely, feeling her ribcage, listening to the rattle in her breathing. "This one needs a veterinarian. Respiratory infection, maybe pneumonia starting." "I have no money for veterinarian. I feed them before I feed myself, but it is not enough." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "I tried to find them homes, but people see homeless women with puppies and they think drugs, they think scam. Nobody wants dogs from someone like me." Marcus stood, processing the information, his mind automatically shifting into mission planning mode, despite his conscious desire to stay disconnected. Immediate needs: food, medical care, dry shelter. Secondary needs: understand the threat, assess enemy capabilities, determine if this was isolated incident or part of larger pattern. "Those men," he said, "you know them?" Elena's face tightened with something beyond fear, something closer to resigned dread. "They work for a man named Blackwood, Garrett Blackwood. He owns half the town, sits on city council. Everyone says he will be mayor soon. 6 months ago, he started buying the industrial district, the old cannery buildings, all the empty warehouses. He wants to build hotels, luxury condos, places for rich tourists." She took another sip of coffee, her hands steadying slightly. "But first," he says, "the area must be cleaned. No homeless camps, no stray animals, nothing that makes investors nervous." "So he's clearing you out, not just clearing, making disappear." Elena's eyes met his with the weight of terrible knowledge. 7 people I knew from the camps, they are gone. Not moved to another town, not in the shelters, just gone. Police say they left on their own, but I saw Roberto. He was 68 years old with bad legs. He would not just walk away. And Maria, she had a cat she loved like a child. She would never leave without that cat. But both of them vanished. Marcus felt the familiar coldness settling into his chest, the combat mindset that separated emotion from analysis. If Elena's account was accurate, this wasn't harassment. It was systematic elimination, the kind of operation that required resources, organization, and protection from legal consequences. "You report this to anyone besides local police?" "Who would believe a homeless woman?" Elena's laugh held no humor. "I tried to call the state police, but they said it was local jurisdiction. I tried the newspaper, but the editor, he is Blackwood's friend. Father Torres at St. Anthony's Church, he believes me. He has been writing down names, dates, trying to make documentation. But what can a priest do against a man who owns the police chief?" Thor's ears suddenly swiveled toward the door, his body going rigid. Marcus moved instantly to the window, staying to the side of the frame, using the angle to observe without exposing himself to potential line of sight from outside. A vehicle approached up the access road, moving slowly, deliberately. Not the black pickup from earlier. This was a police cruiser. Port Angeles PD, markings visible even through the rain. "Stay here," Marcus told Elena, his voice dropping into command register. "Keep the puppies quiet. Thor, bleep." The dog remained in position as Marcus stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. The cruiser pulled into the driveway and stopped, engine idling, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm. For a long moment, nobody emerged, and Marcus recognized the tactic. Establish presence, create uncertainty, force the subject to make the first move. He waited, rain soaking his shirt, arms relaxed at his sides, posture communicating neither submission nor aggression. Just standing, just being. The kind of stillness that came from confidence in his ability to handle whatever came next. The driver's door finally opened, and a man climbed out, wearing a chief's uniform, with enough decorations to suggest he valued appearance over function. Maybe 55, with the soft middle and florid complexion of someone who spent more time at council meetings than on patrol. His hand rested on his service weapon, not threatening, but not casual either. "Marcus Dalton," the chief said, making it a statement rather than question. "Mind if we talk? Talking now. Inside might be more comfortable. Here's fine." Marcus didn't move from his position, blocking the door. The chief's expression tightened slightly, a man unused to having his suggestions declined. "I'm Chief Robert Hendricks. Got a call about an incident under the Highway 101 overpass. Report says you interfered with a lawful eviction notice being served." "Report's incomplete," Marcus said flatly. "3 men threatening an unarmed woman and attempting to destroy property. No badges, no paperwork, no legal authority. That's not eviction, that's assault. The men you confronted work for Blackwood Development, which owns that property. They have every right to remove trespassers and eliminate safety hazards." Hendricks's voice carried the smooth cadence of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. "Stray animals carry disease, create liability issues. The company has insurance concerns. Those concerns include drowning puppies in the strait." Something flickered across Hendricks's face, quickly suppressed. "I don't know what you think you heard, but I know exactly what I heard," Marcus interrupted, his voice remaining quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Explicit threats of violence against a woman and animals. If your officers work security for Blackwood, they should understand the legal distinction between property rights and criminal assault." Hendricks's hand tightened on his weapon grip, a tell that Marcus filed away for future reference. "Let me be clear, Mr. Dalton. Port Angeles is a small town with its own way of handling things. We don't need outsiders coming in and creating problems where they don't exist. The woman you're protecting is a known vagrant with mental health issues. The puppies are probably stolen property. You're putting yourself in a very complicated situation." "Doesn't feel complicated." Marcus held the chief's gaze without blinking. "Woman needed help. I provided it. That's the whole situation, is it?" Hendricks took a step closer, and Marcus saw Thor's shadow move behind the window glass, the dog tracking the threat even from inside. "Because from where I'm standing, a stranger with military background rolls into town and immediately gets involved in local business affairs worth millions of dollars. That creates questions about motivation, about whose interests you might be representing. Nobody's interests but my own. Then in your own interest, let me give you some friendly advice." Hendricks's smile held no warmth. "Garrett Blackwood is an important man in this community. He employs 200 people, contributes to every charity, supports economic development that keeps this town from dying. The people you're defending are obstacles to progress, and progress always wins. Always. You keep interfering, you're going to find yourself facing charges ranging from trespassing to assault. And that military service you're proud of won't protect you from a local jury that understands which side their bread is buttered on." Marcus said nothing for 3 full heartbeats, just stared at this man who wore a badge while serving as errand boy for a corporate predator. When he finally spoke, his voice could have cut glass. "Are we done?" Hendricks's face flushed darker. "We're done when I say we're done. I want to see the woman. I want to verify she's here voluntarily and not being held against her will." She's sleeping. Come back with a warrant. I don't need a warrant for a wellness check. Yeah, Marcus said softly. You do. The moment balanced on the edge of escalation, rain falling between them, Thor's low growl barely audible through the door. Hendrix's hand was still on his weapon, and Marcus calculated the distance between them, the angles, the sequence of movements that would be required if this went kinetic. Disarm, control, neutralize. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then Hendrix stepped back, his smile returning but colder now, more calculated. You're making a mistake, a big one, but I guess you'll figure that out soon enough. He walked back to his cruiser, then paused with his hand on the door. Oh, and Mr. Dalton, your truck's registration expires in 3 days. Make sure you get that renewed. Wouldn't want you to get stranded here with expired tags. Traffic violations can be very expensive in this jurisdiction. The threat was clear. We're watching you. We know your details. We can make your life difficult in 1,000 small legal ways. Marcus watched the cruiser reverse down the driveway and disappear into the rain before returning inside. Elena stood near the window, her face pale with fear beyond cold. He will tell Blackwood you are helping me, she whispered. That makes you a target too. Good, Marcus said, and meant it. Because targets could be tracked, studied, predicted, and more importantly, they could draw fire away from people who couldn't defend themselves. Thor moved to his side, and Marcus rested one hand on the dog's head, feeling the warm solidity of his partner's presence. Not his fight, not his town. The words had lost all meaning somewhere between finding Elena under that overpass and watching a corrupt police chief deliver veiled threats on behalf of a man who made homeless people disappear. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was attempted murder dressed in legal language and civic progress. And Marcus had spent 15 years learning how to respond to people who hurt those who couldn't fight back. We need supplies, he said to Elena. Food, medicine for the puppies, warm clothes for you, and we need information. Everything you know about Blackwood, his operations, his people, everything. Elena nodded slowly, something like hope kindling in her tired eyes. You are going to help me? Marcus looked at Thor, then at the 3 tiny puppies sleeping in their makeshift bed, then back at this woman who'd chosen to protect helpless animals even when it meant risking her own life. Yeah, he said quietly, I am. Outside, the rain continued falling like the sky was washing away the space for neutrality, leaving only the choice between standing or walking away. And Marcus Dalton had never been good at walking away. The Olympic Animal Hospital sat on the outskirts of Port Angeles, in a converted house that still maintained residential charm despite the clinical addition of a parking lot and professional signage. Marcus pulled his truck into a space near the entrance. Studying the building with tactical assessment that had become involuntary reflex. Single story, multiple exits, good sightlines, residential neighborhood providing witnesses to any aggressive action. Defensible if necessary, but unlikely to need defending in broad daylight. Elena sat beside him, holding the pale puppy with blue eyes, the one whose breathing had worsened overnight despite the warmth of the cabin. The small animal's ribs showed through thin fur with each labored breath, and her whimpers had taken on a quality that Marcus recognized from combat medic training. The sound of a body losing a fight it didn't understand. I cannot pay, Elena said quietly, the same words she'd repeated 3 times during the drive. Whatever this costs, I have nothing. Already handled, Marcus interrupted, though he had no idea what veterinary care cost and didn't particularly care. Money was one problem he didn't have. Thanks to hazard pay accumulated over 15 years of deployments, he barely survived. Thor remained in the truck on guard duty, his amber eyes tracking every vehicle that passed, every person who walked by. Marcus had left both windows cracked despite the cold, ensuring the dog could exit quickly if needed. And Thor's body language communicated he understood his assignment. Protect the vehicle, monitor for threats, alert if danger approached. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and animal fear, a combination that made Marcus's jaw tighten with memories of field hospitals and triage tents. A young woman stood behind the reception desk, maybe 25, with purple hair and kind eyes that widened slightly when she saw the puppy in Elena's arms. Oh no, she breathed. Dr. Chen, emergency. A door opened immediately, and a woman emerged wearing scrubs and an expression of focused intensity. She was maybe 34, Chinese-American, with practical short hair and the kind of efficient movements that spoke of someone who didn't waste time on unnecessary gestures. Her eyes went to the puppy, then to Elena, then to Marcus, and something in her expression shifted from clinical assessment to recognition. "You're the man with the German Shepherd," she said. "You brought him in 6 months ago with the shrapnel injury." Marcus nodded once, surprised she remembered. Thor's treatment had been a single visit, paid in cash, minimal conversation. He hadn't expected to register in anyone's memory. "This one needs help more than he did," Marcus said, gesturing to the puppy. Dr. Chen moved forward, gently taking the small animal from Elena's arms, her fingers already probing, assessing, her expression darkening. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, respiratory infection advancing to pneumonia. How long has she been like this?" 2 weeks I have her," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I tried to feed them, keep them warm, but I have so little." "This isn't your fault," Dr. Chen said firmly, her tone leaving no room for self-recrimination. "Come with me, both of you." They followed her into an examination room where she placed the puppy on a steel table under bright lights that made the animal's condition brutally clear. Marcus had seen enough field casualties to recognize the look. The body was shutting down, prioritizing vital organs, abandoning peripheral systems in a desperate bid for survival. Dr. Chen worked with practiced efficiency, inserting an IV line so small it seemed impossible, administering fluids and antibiotics. Her movements precise and gentle. "She needs to stay here, 48 hours minimum, possibly longer depending on how she responds to treatment." "The others?" Marcus asked. "Bring them in. I need to examine all 3. She looked up from her work, meeting his eyes directly. "Where did you find them?" Elena started to speak, but Marcus touched her arm gently, a silent communication. "Let me handle this. Someone abandoned them. We're trying to find them proper homes." Dr. Chen's expression suggested she heard what he wasn't saying. "Abandoned. Right. And I'm guessing this has something to do with the increased number of injured strays I've been treating over the past 6 months." She attached a warming blanket around the puppy, then turned to face them fully. "I'm going to tell you something, and you can decide what to do with the information. 3 months ago, someone dumped a dog outside my clinic at 2 in the morning, severe trauma. Looked like he'd been beaten with something metal. He died before I could save him." Marcus felt his spine straighten, combat instincts sensing where this was leading. "I have security cameras," Dr. Chen continued. "They caught the vehicle, black pickup truck, commercial plates registered to Blackwood Development Corporation. I reported it to the police. Chief Hendricks told me I must have been mistaken about what I saw. That Blackwood Development would never be involved in animal cruelty, and that I should be careful about making accusations that could damage my business reputation." The silence that followed felt heavy with implication. "Will you still have the footage?" Marcus asked quietly. "On a drive in my safe, along with documentation of 7 other suspicious cases over the past year, all involving animals found in areas where Blackwood is acquiring property." She checked the puppy's IV flow, adjusted a setting, then looked back at Marcus. "I'm a veterinarian, not a detective, but I recognize a pattern when I see one. Someone is systematically clearing strays from the industrial district, and they're not being gentle about it." Elena made a small sound of distress, crossing herself. "They told me the dogs would go in the water with rocks. I thought they were just trying to scare me." "They weren't," Dr. Chen said grimly. "Last month, fishermen found 3 dogs washed up on the beach, their bodies weighted with cinder blocks tied to their legs. Police ruled it an isolated incident, said it was probably teenagers." Her jaw tightened. "Teenagers don't have access to commercial vehicles and construction materials from active development sites." Marcus processed the information with the detached efficiency of mission briefing. What had seemed like harassment of a single homeless woman was revealing itself as systematic campaign of terror, coordinated and methodical, targeting the most vulnerable populations with the confidence of people who believed themselves untouchable. "I need that footage," he said, "and any other documentation you have." Dr. Chen studied him for a long moment, her expression calculating. "Why? What are you going to do with it?" "Make sure the right people see it. People who aren't on Blackwood's payroll." "And who would that be? He owns half the town, has connections all the way to the state capitol. Everyone says he's going to run for Congress next year." She crossed her arms, defensive but hopeful. "I've tried reporting this through proper channels. It goes nowhere." "What makes you different?" Marcus met her eyes with the steady gaze of someone who'd made harder promises in worse circumstances. I'm not from here. I don't care about his money or his connections, and I have resources he doesn't know about. Dr. Chen held his gaze for several heartbeats, then nodded slowly. I get off at 6. Come back then and I'll give you everything I have. But Mr. Dalton, be careful. I've lived in this town my whole life, and I've never seen people as scared as they are of Garrett Blackwood. He doesn't just ruin people who cross him, he makes them disappear. So I've heard, Marcus said quietly. They left Elena at the clinic with the sick puppy, Dr. Chen assuring her that all 3 animals would receive care regardless of payment, and Marcus promising to return in 4 hours with the other 2 puppies. As they walked back to the truck, Marcus felt the familiar weight of commitment settling onto his shoulders, the recognition that he'd crossed a line from observer to participant in something that would escalate before it resolved. Thor's greeting was enthusiastic but controlled, the dog checking both of them for signs of injury or distress before resuming his guardian position. Marcus started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, his mind already 3 moves ahead, planning contingencies for scenarios that hadn't yet developed but inevitably would. Where are we going? Elena asked. St. Anthony's Church. You said Father Torres has documentation. I want to see it. The church occupied a corner lot in the older part of downtown, a stone building that predated most of the surrounding structures, with the kind of solid permanence that suggested it would outlast whatever modern chaos swirled around it. Marcus parked in a small lot adjacent to the building, noting the security cameras positioned at corners, the heavy doors with quality locks, the elevated position that provided decent sight lines of approaches. Inside, the space was dim and cool, lit by candles and filtered sunlight through stained glass that painted the floor in colors that seemed too beautiful for the ugliness they were confronting. An elderly man in priest's collar knelt at the altar, his white hair catching the candlelight, his shoulders bent with age or burden, or both. Father Torres, Elena called softly. The priest rose with the careful movements of someone whose joints protested every motion, turning to face them with a smile that transformed his weathered face into something luminous. Elena, mi hija, I have been praying for you. His eyes moved to Marcus, assessing him with the shrewd gaze of someone who'd heard confessions for decades and learned to read souls. And you have brought a guardian angel, I see. Not an angel, Marcus said. Just someone who's tired of watching bad people hurt good ones. Father Torres' smile deepened. Sometimes they are the same thing. Come, both of you, we should speak in private. He led them to a small office behind the sanctuary, its walls lined with books and crucifixes, a desk covered in papers that suggested a man who took his responsibilities seriously. From a locked drawer, he withdrew a black notebook, its pages filled with careful handwriting that documented names, dates, and circumstances. 7 people, Father Torres said, opening the book to marked pages. Roberto Mendez, 68, last seen September 3rd. Maria Gonzalez, 42, disappeared September 19th. James Whitmore, 55, vanished October 1st. He continued through the list, each name a person, each date a moment when someone ceased to exist in any official capacity. Marcus studied the entries, his combat intelligence training recognizing patterns that civilian law enforcement either missed or chose to ignore. All disappearances occurred on weekends. All victims were homeless individuals known to camp in areas Blackwood had recently acquired. All had been reported to police with 0 follow-up investigation. Have any bodies been found? Marcus asked. Father Torres shook his head. Nothing. They simply ceased to be, as if they never existed. The police say homeless people move frequently, that there is no evidence of foul play. But I knew these people. I knew their routines, their struggles, their hopes. They would not simply vanish without telling someone, without taking their few possessions. Blackwood is cleaning his investment, Marcus said quietly, making the property attractive to buyers by eliminating anything that decreases value, including people. This is evil, Elena whispered. This is murder. Yes, Father Torres agreed. But murder requires proof, and proof requires someone willing to look. The local authorities will not investigate because they benefit from Blackwood's success. The state police defer to local jurisdiction, and the people who disappear have no families with resources to demand justice. No voices loud enough to be heard above the machinery of progress. Marcus closed the notebook, his decision already made. I know someone. Federal level, outside the local corruption chain. Former teammate, now with the FBI field office in Seattle. If I can give him enough evidence to justify investigation, he'll come. Father Torres's eyes brightened with something fragile and dangerous called hope. You would do this? Risk yourself for people you do not know? In a town where you have no stake. Marcus thought about 15 years of fighting wars in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. Protecting people he'd never meet, stopping threats that would never make headlines. He thought about coming home to find that the same evil existed here, just wearing better suits and speaking with polished words instead of religious extremism. Yeah, he said simply, I would. Then I will pray for you, my son. And I will prepare this church to provide sanctuary if it becomes necessary. Father Torres placed one weathered hand on Marcus's shoulder. But know this, Garrett Blackwood is a dangerous man with dangerous friends. He will not allow you to interfere without consequence. I'm counting on it, Marcus replied, and meant it, because consequences meant engagement. And engagement meant Blackwood would focus attention on Marcus instead of on vulnerable people who couldn't fight back. Drawing fire was something Marcus understood, a tactic he'd employed in every theater of war he'd operated in. The difference was that this time, the enemy wore expensive suits and hid behind legal frameworks instead of carrying AK-47s. But evil was evil, regardless of how it dressed itself. And Marcus had spent his entire adult life learning how to eliminate it. The cabin had transformed into a tactical operations center by the time darkness fell. Maps of Port Angeles spread across the kitchen table. Notes from Father Torres organized by date and location. Dr. Chen's security footage cued on Marcus's laptop. Elena slept in the bedroom with the 2 remaining puppies, exhaustion finally overriding fear. While Thor maintained his vigil by the front door, ears rotating to track sounds that human hearing couldn't detect. Marcus sat at the table reviewing the evidence with the methodical focus of pre-mission briefing, identifying patterns that painted a picture far uglier than simple harassment. Blackwood Development had acquired 17 properties over the past 18 months, each purchase preceded by a spike in reported vagrancy and animal control calls. Each closure followed by mysterious disappearances of people who'd been camping in those areas. The correlation was mathematically impossible to dismiss as coincidence. His satellite phone, the encrypted military-grade device he'd sworn he wouldn't use during leave, sat on the table like an accusation. Marcus stared at it for a long moment before picking it up and dialing a number he'd memorized years ago in Kabul. 3 rings, then a familiar voice. Dalton? This better be good. It's past midnight here. Jake, I need a favor. Marcus kept his voice low, conscious of Elena sleeping 20 feet away. Off the books, no official channels yet. Special Agent Jake Morrison had been his spotter in Team 3 before transitioning to the FBI. A man who understood that sometimes justice required operating in gray spaces between legal procedure and moral imperative. What kind of favor are we talking about? The kind that involves a pattern of missing persons, systematic intimidation, and local law enforcement corruption in a small Washington town. Marcus laid out the facts with precision. No embellishment, just data points and documented evidence. When he finished, the silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. You've got documentation? Jake finally asked. Video footage, witness statements, a priest's logbook of disappearances, medical records of injured animals, enough to establish probable cause for federal investigation. And you're calling me instead of local FBI field office because? Because the target is Garrett Blackwood, city council member with political connections reaching to state capitol, and I need someone who'll actually investigate instead of making courtesy calls to warn him. Marcus heard the edge in his own voice, the barely controlled anger at systematic abuse of power. People are disappearing, Jake. Homeless veterans, probably. People who served this country and came home to nothing, and now they're being eliminated like pest control. Another silence, then Jake's voice came back harder, more focused. Send me everything you have. Encrypted channel, Protocol 7. I'll review tonight and contact Seattle Field Office Supervisor in the morning. If your evidence supports federal jurisdiction, we can move fast. But Marcus, you need to stand down. Let us handle this through proper channels. Can't do that. Why not? Because Blackwood knows I'm involved now. Local police chief already paid me a visit, delivered threats, thinly disguised as friendly advice. And I've got a homeless woman and 3 puppies in my cabin who will be dead within 48 hours if I step back and wait for bureaucracy to protect them. Jake's sigh carried years of friendship and mutual understanding of impossible situations. You're going to kick the hornet's nest, aren't you? Already did. Just making sure someone's ready to clean up when it comes apart. 48 hours, Jake said. That's how long you need to keep everyone alive while I build a case that'll hold up in federal court. Can you do that without creating an international incident? This is Washington State, not Kandahar. Should be easier. That's not even remotely reassuring. Jake's voice carried reluctant affection. Watch your back, brother, and keep that dog of yours close. Thor's got better instincts than both of us combined. The call ended, and Marcus immediately began uploading files to the encrypted server, watching progress bars creep across his screen while his mind ran through defensive scenarios. The cabin was defensible, but not ideal. Single access road creating both advantage and vulnerability, forest cover providing concealment for attackers. He'd need early warning systems, fallback positions, clear fields of fire if situation escalated to armed confrontation. Thor's low growl interrupted his planning, the dog's body going rigid in that specific way that meant human presence detected at distance. Marcus moved to the window, killing the cabin's interior lights with a wall switch, letting his eyes adjust to darkness while scanning the tree line with night-adapted vision. Nothing visible yet, but Thor didn't make mistakes. Someone was out there. Marcus opened the gun safe he'd installed on day 1, withdrawing his Sig Sauer P226 and press-checking the chamber to verify a round was seated. 15 years of training made the movements automatic, muscle memory that required no conscious thought. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he'd learned in places like Ramadi and Helmand that being prepared to fight often prevented the need to. Elena, he called quietly toward the bedroom. Get up. Take the puppies into the bathroom. Lock the door. Stay away from exterior walls. She appeared seconds later, sleep-fogged, but alert enough to recognize urgency. They are coming? Someone is. Move, now. She scooped up both puppies and disappeared into the bathroom, the lock clicking with finality. Marcus positioned himself at an angle to the main window, using the wall for cover while maintaining sightlines to the access road and front approach. Thor moved to his left side, body low, utterly silent, ready to respond to commands or act independently depending on threat development. Headlights appeared on the access road, moving slowly, deliberately, not trying for stealth, but not rushing either. The vehicle stopped 50 yards from the cabin, just beyond the range where identification would be easy, and killed its lights. Engine still running, exhaust visible in the cold air. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. He glanced down, keeping most of his attention on the vehicle. You have something that belongs to Mr. Blackwood. Return it, and there's no problem. Marcus typed one-handed, weapons still trained on the vehicle. Don't know what you're talking about. The response came within seconds. The woman, the dogs, their property removed from Blackwood land. Theft. We can handle this easy or hard. Third option, Marcus typed, you leave, don't come back. The vehicle's doors opened, and 4 figures emerged into the darkness, their silhouettes. Tests backlit by interior dome lights before they closed the doors, all male, all moving with coordination that suggested training, or at least experience working together. One of them was notably larger than the others, and even at this distance, Marcus recognized the build and movement pattern of the Russian from the overpass confrontation. His phone buzzed again. Last chance. Walk away. You're one man. We're many. You can't win this. Marcus set the phone down and spoke quietly to Thor in German, the language they'd used in combat for years. Bewachen. Guard. The dog's acknowledgement was a barely perceptible shift in posture, his attention laser-focused on the approaching men. The 4 figures spread out as they advanced, maintaining spacing that prevented a single point of engagement, moving with tactical awareness that confirmed Marcus's assessment. These weren't street thugs. They were professionals or ex-military. The Russian took point position, 2 others flanked at 30-degree angles, and the 4th hung back as overwatch or reserve. They stopped at the edge of the cabin's illumination from the porch light, still in shadow, but close enough now for voices to carry. Marcus Dalton, the Russian called out, his accent thick, but his English clear. We don't want trouble. Just give us the woman, we go away. Everyone stays healthy. No. Marcus replied, his voice calm and flat. the tone that preceded violence in every language. You are making very bad choice, my friend. You know who Mr. Blackwood is? What he can do? He owns this town. He owns the police. He owns judges. You are nobody here. Nobody will care what happens to you. Then you've got nothing to worry about, Marcus said. Leave. The Russian laughed, a sound without humor. You think you are tough guy? I was Spetsnaz. I fought in Chechnya, in Georgia. Places that make your Afghanistan look like kindergarten. You are tough? I have killed tougher men before breakfast. Then you should recognize when you're outmatched. The words hung in the cold air, a challenge and a warning wrapped together. The Russian's posture shifted, shoulders squaring, weight transferring to balls of his feet. Combat stance. Preparing to close distance. Last time I offer, the Russian said. Give us the woman, or we take her. And we take you apart doing it. Marcus's response was to raise his weapon slightly, bringing it into clear view, the message unmistakable. Approach and find out. The Russian's hand moved toward his waistband, and that microsecond of motion was all Thor needed. The dog launched from the porch like a fur-covered missile, 95 pounds of trained aggression, covering 30 feet in less than 2 seconds. His barking transformed into something primal and terrifying that echoed off the trees and made the flanking men stumble backward in surprise. Thor didn't attack, didn't make contact. He positioned himself between Marcus and the 4 men, his body language communicating in universal predator language. Come closer and I will end you. Call him off, the Russian said, his earlier confidence fractured by the sudden appearance of 95 pounds of military-trained violence. Give me a reason to, Marcus replied. The standoff balanced on a knife's edge, 4 armed men facing 1 man and a dog, mathematics favoring the attackers, but psychology working against them. Because Thor wasn't a pet protecting his owner. He was a weapons system waiting for target authorization, and every man there recognized the difference. The Russian's phone buzzed, and he answered without taking his eyes off Thor. Listened for a moment. Then spoke in rapid Russian that Marcus's limited understanding couldn't follow. When he lowered the phone, his expression had shifted from aggressive to carefully neutral. Mr. Blackwood says we go now. But this is not finished. He wants to meet with you. Talk like civilized people. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, his office downtown. You come, you talk. Maybe we work something out where nobody gets hurt. And if I don't come? The Russian smile showed too many teeth. Then we stop being civilized and you learn what happens to people who interfere with progress in this town. Your choice, but choose smart. Mr. Blackwood is generous to friends, very harsh to enemies. They retreated to their vehicle, maintaining visual contact the entire way, nobody turning their back, professional enough to know that was when people got shot. The truck reversed down the access road, turned, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving only tire tracks and the smell of exhaust. Marcus lowered his weapon but didn't holster it, waiting until Thor's body language confirmed the immediate threat had withdrawn. Bayfus. The dog returned to his side, still alert, but accepting that this engagement had concluded. Marcus checked his perimeter one more time before returning inside and flipping on the lights. Elena emerged from the bathroom, her face pale but composed. They will come back. Yes, Marcus agreed. But not tonight. Tonight they're going to report to Blackwood, and he's going to decide whether to escalate or negotiate. You will meet with him? Marcus ejected his pistol's magazine, press-checked the chamber again, then reloaded with fresh rounds, the ritual providing thinking time. Yeah, I'll meet him. But not in his office, not on his terms. I'm going to make him come to me. Somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses. And while he's talking, Jake will be building a federal case that'll drop on him like a hammer. And if the federal case takes too long, if he decides to attack before they can help? Marcus met her eyes with the calm certainty of someone who'd survived situations where the mathematics of violence suggested he shouldn't have. Then I'll do what I've been trained to do. Protect people who can't protect themselves, eliminate threats that won't respond to reason, and make sure that when the dust settles, the right people are still standing. Elena crossed herself, whispering a prayer, then said something that made Marcus's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. God sent you to us. I believe this. You are not here by accident. Marcus wanted to argue that there was no God, no divine plan, just random chance and combat training that happened to align at the right moment. But looking at this woman who'd chosen to shield puppies with her own body, at Thor standing guard with absolute loyalty, at the evidence of systematic evil spread across his table. He found he couldn't quite dismiss the possibility that sometimes coincidence looked a lot like purpose. "Get some sleep," he said instead. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated." Outside, the rain had started again, hammering against the roof with renewed intensity. And somewhere in the darkness, Garrett Blackwood was learning that the homeless woman and her puppies had found a protector who wouldn't be intimidated, bribed, or frightened away. And in 46 hours, the FBI would arrive with enough evidence to dismantle an empire built on making vulnerable people disappear. Marcus just had to keep everyone alive until then. Dawn broke over Port Angeles with the kind of gray light that suggested the sun had given up trying to penetrate the cloud cover, settling instead for dim illumination that turned the town into a study in shadows and muted colors. Marcus had been awake for 3 hours running perimeter checks, reviewing defensive positions, and coordinating with Jake Morrison on the encrypted line while Elena and the puppies slept under Thor's watchful guard. The plan had crystallized during the pre-dawn hours with the clarity that came from years of mission planning in hostile territory. Blackwood wanted a meeting, expected Marcus to come crawling to his office like every other person he'd intimidated into submission. Instead, Marcus would force the confrontation into public space, somewhere with witnesses and security cameras, somewhere Blackwood's usual tactics of isolated violence wouldn't apply. St. Anthony's Church, neutral ground, sacred space, and Father Torres had already agreed to facilitate the meeting in his sanctuary at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Marcus had sent the location via text to the number that had threatened him last night, with a simple message: "You want to talk? We talk here. Public, witnesses, or don't talk at all." The response had taken 20 minutes, suggesting consultation with Blackwood himself. Then finally, 2 p.m., he'll be there. Now Marcus stood in the church parking lot watching a black Mercedes sedan pull in with the kind of arrogant precision that announced its occupant considered himself above ordinary traffic laws. The vehicle stopped in a space marked for handicapped parking, engine idling, tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. Marcus waited, Thor at his side in perfect heel position, both of them utterly still in the cold morning air. He'd positioned himself with clear sight lines to all approaches, back to the church's stone wall, wearing a jacket that concealed his holstered cig but allowed quick access if necessary. Not looking for violence, but ready for it if Blackwood chose that path. The Mercedes's rear door opened, and a man emerged who radiated wealth and power like other people radiated body heat. Garrett Blackwood, at 44, looked like a recruitment poster for corporate success. 6 feet tall, with the kind of athletic build that came from personal trainers and boutique gyms. Blonde hair styled with precision that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His suit was charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, custom tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and trim waist. And the watch on his wrist caught the dim light with the unmistakable gleam of a Rolex Submariner worth $40,000. But it was his eyes that told the real story, pale blue and utterly cold, assessing Marcus with the same calculations someone might use when deciding whether to step around dog waste on a sidewalk. This was a man who'd learned early that money could solve most problems and violence could solve the rest. And the combination had created a personality that viewed other humans as assets to be acquired or obstacles to be removed. 2 other men emerged from the Mercedes, flanking Blackwood with practiced coordination. One was the Russian from previous encounters, Viktor Kozlov, according to Jake's preliminary background check, former Spetsnaz with a jacket full of assault charges that had mysteriously disappeared from official records. The other was younger, maybe 32, with the cauliflower ears and scarred knuckles of an MMA fighter who'd taken too many hits to the head and discovered he enjoyed inflicting them more than competing within rules. "Marcus Dalton," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the smooth cadence of expensive education and practiced charm. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet, though I admit a church seems an unusual choice for business discussion." "Seemed appropriate," Marcus replied, his tone flat and uninviting. "Given we're discussing people disappearing and animals being drowned, figured we could use some divine oversight." Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. "I understand there's been some confusion about property rights and local ordinances. Victor tells me you've involved yourself in a situation you don't fully understand, and I thought perhaps we could clarify things before misunderstandings escalate into something unfortunate. No misunderstanding. You're clearing homeless people from land you've acquired, using violence and intimidation, making them disappear when they don't comply. That's not business, that's serial murder. The words hung in the cold air like an accusation carved in ice. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those pale eyes, a recognition that Marcus wasn't going to play the game according to normal rules where money and threats made problems evaporate. Those are serious allegations, Blackwood said carefully. Allegations without evidence are called slander, Mr. Dalton, and my attorneys are very good at making slanderers regret their words. But I'm a reasonable man. Let's say, hypothetically, that some overzealous employees of mine took steps to expedite property development that exceeded their authority. That would be unfortunate, certainly, but not my personal responsibility. I can't control every action of every person on my payroll. Plausible deniability, Marcus said. Except you've got a pattern going back 18 months across 17 properties with documented correlation between acquisitions and disappearances. That's not overzealous employees, that's systematic policy from the top. Blackwood's smile finally faded, replaced by something colder and more honest. You've been busy, talking to people, gathering information, playing detective. But here's what you don't understand about Port Angeles, Mr. Dalton. This town was dying. Fishing industry collapsed, lumber mills closed, young people leaving for Seattle or Portland because there was nothing here but poverty and decline. I'm bringing jobs, investment, a future. Yes, that requires removing obstacles. Yes, some people get displaced. That's called progress, and progress always has casualties. Casualties, Marcus repeated, letting the word hang there. That's what you call human beings whose only crime was being poor and vulnerable. Casualties. Like they're acceptable losses in your war for profit. Every war has losses, Blackwood said, his mask of civility slipping further. You, of all people, should understand that, Lieutenant Commander. How many casualties did your missions create? How many civilians died as collateral damage while you pursued your objectives? Don't stand there and judge me for doing what you've done your entire career, just in a different uniform. Thor growled low in his throat, responding to the tension radiating from Marcus, and Blackwood took a reflexive step backward before catching himself. The flicker of fear in his expression was there and gone in a microsecond. But Marcus saw it and filed it away. For all his wealth and power, Blackwood was afraid of direct physical threat, comfortable only when violence was delegated to employees and kept at arm's length. Difference is, Marcus said quietly, I fought armed enemies who'd made their choice. You murder homeless veterans who served their country and came home to nothing. You threaten women protecting puppies. You use wealth and corruption to prey on people who can't fight back. That's not war. That's cowardice dressed up in expensive suits. Blackwood's face flushed with anger, the careful control fracturing. You want to talk about cowardice? You're hiding behind a church, behind a priest, behind the civilian authority you claim to represent. But authority doesn't protect you here. This is my town, my infrastructure, my investment. You're an outsider with no standing, no support, and no understanding of how things work in the real world where adults make hard choices. I understand perfectly, Marcus said. You've built an empire on corruption and murder, protected by local officials you've bought and intimidated. You think you're untouchable because nobody's ever pushed back hard enough to matter. But that ends now. Does it? Blackwood stepped closer, his confidence returning as he remembered he held all the cards, all the power, all the resources. Let me explain your situation, Mr. Dalton. I own the police chief, the mayor, 3 city council members, and I have connections to the state attorney general's office. Any investigation you try to initiate will die before it starts. Any charges you attempt to bring will be dismissed. Any witnesses you think you have will discover that continuing to talk is very bad for their health and employment prospects. You have no leverage, no allies, and no path to victory. All you have is misplaced heroism that's going to get you hurt or worse. Wrong, Marcus said simply. I have evidence, video footage, documented disappearances, witness statements, financial records connecting your corporation to criminal activity. And I have a former teammate who's now FBI, who received all that evidence last night and is currently briefing the Seattle field office supervisor on opening a federal investigation into systematic violations of civil rights under color of law. For the first time, genuine concern crossed Blackwood's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Marcus pulled out his phone, navigated to his encrypted messages, and turned the screen so Blackwood could see Jake's latest update. Case file opened. Federal warrants being drafted. ETA 36 hours. Blackwood stared at the message, his jaw tightening, calculations racing behind his eyes. When he looked up, the charm and pretense had evaporated completely, leaving only naked threat. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Federal investigation takes time, requires resources, involves bureaucracy. I can make you disappear in the next hour. You, the woman, those dogs, all of it gone before any federal agent sets foot in this town. You think you're protecting people? You just painted a target on everyone associated with you. No, Marcus said, his voice dropping to the quiet register that preceded violence. I gave you a choice. Walk away, dismantle your operation, accept that your empire is finished, or push back and discover that threatening me was the biggest mistake of your life. Blackwood laughed, a sound sharp and ugly. You're one man. I have resources, people, infrastructure. What are you going to do? Fight my entire organization? Marcus's response was delivered with absolute calm certainty. If I have to. The moment balanced on a knife edge, Blackwood's face contorting with rage and calculation, Victor's hand drifting toward his concealed weapon, the M&A fighter shifting his weight in preparation to attack. Thor's growl intensified, the dog's body coiled to launch, waiting only for Marcus's command or the first hostile movement. Then the church door opened, and Father Torres emerged, flanked by two other figures. Dr. Sarah Chen with her phone raised, clearly recording the confrontation, and behind them, Police Chief Hendricks, his face a study in bureaucratic discomfort as he realized his private corruption was being publicly documented. Mr. Blackwood, Father Torres called out, his elderly voice carrying surprising authority. I believe this conversation is finished. And I believe you should leave church property before I'm forced to call authorities who aren't on your payroll. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, calculating odds, assessing damage control. Then his professional smile returned, colder than before. Of course, Father, I apologize for any disruption. Mr. Dalton and I were just finishing our discussion. He turned back to Marcus, his voice dropping to a whisper only they could hear. 36 hours until federal agents arrive, you said. A lot can happen in 36 hours. Buildings catch fire, people have accidents, evidence disappears. And dogs, well, dogs can be very fragile creatures when they wander into the wrong places. Come after me, that's warfare between combatants, Marcus said equally quietly. Touch Elena, Dr. Chen, Father Torres, or any of those puppies, and it becomes something else. Something you won't survive. Clear? Blackwood's smile became a baring of teeth. Crystal. He walked back to his Mercedes, with Victor and the MMA fighter in tow, the vehicle pulling out of the parking lot with deliberate slowness, a final display of arrogance and confidence. Marcus watched them go, every tactical instinct screaming that this was the calm before catastrophic escalation that Blackwood had just decided. Ted Murdo was cheaper than surrender. Father Torres approached, Dr. Chen still recording, Chief Hendricks lingering uncertainly in the background. Did I hear correctly? The priest asked. Federal investigation? 36 hours, Marcus confirmed. Until then, we need to fortify positions, gather anyone vulnerable who might be targeted, and prepare for Blackwood to try burning down everything he can't control. The church can provide sanctuary, Father Torres said immediately. Stone walls, security system, multiple exits. I've sheltered people before during gang violence. I can do it again. I'll bring Elena and the puppies here within the hour, Marcus said. Dr. Chen, do you have somewhere secure you can stay? I've got family in Seattle. I can leave today. Good, go. Take your evidence drives with you, make copies, store them separately. If something happens to me or Father Torres, you're the backup witness. Chief Hendricks finally found his voice, stepping forward with the false authority of someone trying to reassert control over a situation that had already escaped him. Now wait just a minute. You can't turn a church into some kind of fortress. There are laws, procedures. Save it, Marcus interrupted. You're done. When federal agents arrive, you're going to be arrested for corruption, conspiracy, and being an accessory to murder. Whether you cooperate now and maybe salvage something from your life, or whether you go down with Blackwood completely, that's your choice. But either way, your authority in this town ended the moment I documented your involvement. Hendricks's face went pale, then flushed with anger, then settled into the gray resignation of a man watching his career and freedom disintegrate in real time. He turned and walked to his patrol car without another word, leaving Marcus wondering if he'd report this conversation to Blackwood or start making deals to save himself. Probably both, Marcus decided. Corruption was like that, everyone betraying everyone else when the ship started sinking. 36 hours, Father Torres repeated thoughtfully. You think we can last that long? Marcus looked at Thor, who stared back with amber eyes that had seen Helmand Province and Kandahar, and a dozen other places where survival was measured in seconds and victory in heartbeats. Then he looked at the church, its stone walls and elevated position, its sanctuary that had sheltered the desperate for over a century. Yeah, he said, we can last, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. He just didn't know how much worse until the fires started. The first fire started at 11:47 that night in the industrial district, flames erupting from the abandoned cannery where 3 homeless families had been sheltering from the October rain. By the time Port Angeles Fire Department arrived, the building was fully involved, smoke visible for miles across the dark water of the strait. No bodies were recovered because Marcus had spent the afternoon evacuating everyone he could find, bringing them to St. Anthony's basement shelter where Father Torres distributed blankets and hot soup, while maintaining a prayer vigil that felt less like faith and more like defiance. The second fire ignited at 12:15 in a warehouse 2 blocks from the church, close enough that Marcus could smell the smoke and see the orange glow reflecting off low clouds. Close enough to be a message, I can reach you anywhere. Marcus stood on the church steps watching flames consume the building. Thor pressed against his leg, both of them hyper-alert for the attack they knew was coming. Because fires were a distraction, pulling emergency resources to multiple locations while the real assault developed into chaos. Textbook insurgent tactics, the kind Marcus had countered in Fallujah and Ramadi, now being employed on American soil by a corporate predator who decided elimination was more cost-effective than negotiation. How many are inside? Elena asked from the doorway behind him, her voice tight with fear but steady with determination. 14. Marcus replied without turning. You, Father Torres, Dr. Chen who refused to leave, 11 homeless people we pulled from the camps, plus 3 puppies and Thor. Against how many of Blackwood's men? Unknown. At least a dozen, based on the vehicles I've spotted circling the perimeter. Probably more. He checked his phone, reading Jake's latest update. Federal team mobilizing. Arrival time 0800 tomorrow. Hold until then. 8 hours. Marcus had held positions against worse odds for longer in places where air support and QRF existed only in fevered wishes. But those had been military operations with trained personnel. Not a church basement full of civilians and a 77-year-old priest whose only weapons were faith and a landline telephone to 911 that would connect him to police who worked for the enemy. Thor's ears swiveled suddenly, focusing on something in the darkness beyond the parking lot streetlights. Then Marcus heard it too, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching with lights extinguished, engines deliberately quiet. Not fire trucks responding to emergencies, attackers moving into position. Inside, Marcus commanded. Lock the doors, stay away from windows, get everyone into the basement, now. Elena disappeared without argument, understanding that questions wasted time they didn't have. Marcus moved to his defensive position behind a stone pillar that provided cover while maintaining sightlines to all 3 approaches. His SIG was already in hand, magazine checked, round chambered. Safety off. Thor positioned himself in the shadows where he could observe without being immediately visible. a tactic they'd refined in dozens of hostile villages where surprises came with automatic weapons fire. 4 vehicles materialized from the darkness, 2 pickup trucks and 2 SUVs, all black, all stopping just beyond the parking lot perimeter in a loose semicircle that blocked retreat routes. Doors opened and men emerged, Marcus counting 8 visible hostiles with certainty of more remaining in vehicles as reserve force or overwatch. Viktor Kozlov stepped forward from the lead truck, his massive frame unmistakable even in the dim light. "Marcus Dalton," he called out in heavily accented English, "you have made very poor decisions. Mr. Blackwood gives one final chance. Send out the woman and the priest's documentation of names. Keep the dogs if you want. Everyone else walks away." "No," Marcus replied, his voice carrying across the empty space with absolute certainty. "Ain't he? Then you die here, and everyone with you dies. We burn this church like we burned the warehouses. Is very simple mathematics. You are one man with pistol. We are many with rifles and fire. How does this end except badly for you? It ends with federal agents arresting everyone involved in approximately 7 hours. Your choice whether you want to be charged with harassment and arson, or whether you want to add murder of veterans and clergy to that list." Viktor laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "You think federal agents matter? You think Blackwood cannot make federal investigation disappear same as local police? You are naive, my friend. Money reaches everywhere, and Blackwood has more money than you have principles." "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged, "but I've got something more important than money." "What is that?" "Absolutely nothing left to lose." The words hung in the cold air, a statement of fact that carried weight beyond their simplicity. Because Viktor had served in places like Chechnya, had seen what happened when soldiers reached the point where survival stopped mattering compared to completing the mission. And something in Marcus's tone communicated he'd crossed that line and found peace on the other side. Viktor's posture shifted slightly, uncertainty creeping into his aggressive confidence. "You would die for homeless people you do not know? For dogs? This makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense," Marcus said quietly. "Someone has to stand. Someone has to say, this far and no further. Might as well be me." A long silence followed, broken only by the distant sound of sirens responding to fires deliberately set across town. Emergency resources stretched thin and scattered exactly as Blackwood had planned. Then Viktor nodded slowly, a gesture of respect between warriors who understood each other even while standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. "Okay," Viktor said, "I give you soldiers' courtesy. I tell you what comes next so you can prepare. We will use fire and smoke to force evacuation of building. When people run outside, we take who we came for and eliminate witnesses. You can fight. You will kill maybe 2 or 3 of us before we kill you. Or you can walk away now, leave these people to their fate, and live to fight another day in place where victory is possible. Tactical withdrawal is not cowardice, is survival." Marcus considered the offer for exactly 1 second, then replied with the same calm certainty he'd maintained throughout this entire engagement. "I'm not leaving." "Then you are fool, and you will die foolish death." "Maybe, but everyone else lives until federal agents arrive. That's non-negotiable." Viktor sighed, a sound that mixed resignation with reluctant admiration. "You remind me of officer I served under in Chechnya. Stubborn bastard who would not retreat even when tactical situation was hopeless. He died covering withdrawal of his men, killed 37 rebels before they finally brought him down. We gave him military funeral with full honors because some deaths earn respect even from enemies." "I'll try to beat his record," Marcus said. Viktor almost smiled. "I believe you would try." Then his expression hardened, professional soldier reasserting control over personal feelings. "Last chance, walk away." "No." "Then we begin." Viktor retreated to his vehicle and spoke into a radio, his words inaudible but his meaning clear. "Execute the assault." The 4 vehicles repositioned, creating overlapping fields of fire while maintaining distance that prevented Marcus from engaging effectively with a pistol. 2 men emerged from each vehicle, carrying objects that made Marcus's tactical assessment shift from difficult to catastrophic. Molotov cocktails, at least a dozen bottles filled with accelerant and fitted with cloth wicks, the poor man's incendiary weapon that had burned cities throughout history. Simple, effective, and devastating against a stone building with wooden roof and interior structures. 4. He-9, Marcus commanded. Inside. The dog hesitated, his training warring with his instinct to remain at his partner's side, but discipline won, and he retreated through the door Marcus held open. Father Torres, Marcus called into the sanctuary. They're going to firebomb the building. Get everyone into the basement, wet blankets over doorways, anything that can be sealed against smoke. Do it now. He heard scrambling movement, Father Torres' voice calling instructions in English and Spanish. Elena's voice answering with the kind of forced calm that came from refusing to panic, even when panic was the rational response. Then Marcus sealed the heavy wooden door and moved to his fallback position, a stone archway that provided overhead cover while maintaining sight lines to all approaches. The first Molotov cocktail arced through the darkness, trailing fire like a comet, glass shattering against the church's slate roof with a whooshing ignition that sent flames spreading across weathered shingles. The second and third hit the eastern wall, liquid fire running down stone that wouldn't burn but seeking any gap or wooden structure that would. The fourth crashed through a stained glass window depicting Saint Michael defeating Satan, the irony so heavy Marcus almost laughed at the universe's sense of humor. Flames climbed the roof with hungry efficiency, smoke beginning to pour from broken windows and gaps under eaves. Marcus felt heat washing over his position, heard the crackling roar of fire consuming a building that had stood for over a century, sheltering the faithful and desperate through wars and depressions and every manner of human crisis. Now it burned because one man had decided that profit mattered more than human life, and another man had decided that some things were worth dying to prevent. Thor barked from inside the building, the sound communicating distress and urgency. Smoke was penetrating the basement, despite Father Torres' preparations, and the choice was crystallizing with brutal simplicity. Stay inside and suffocate, or exit into kill zone and face gunfire. Marcus's phone buzzed with incoming text from Jake. Federal team airborne, arrival in 6 hours. We have state police mobilizing as backup. You need to hold 6 hours. Marcus looked at the burning building, calculated smoke dispersion and structural integrity, and knew with absolute certainty they didn't have 6 hours. They had maybe 30 minutes before conditions inside became fatal, which meant the only option was offense. Marcus moved to the door, cracked it open, in and spoke to whoever was listening in the smoke-filled interior. Father Torres, bring everyone to the main door. When I give the signal, you run for the tree line north side. Stay low, don't stop for anything. State police are en route. You just need to reach cover and wait. What about you? Father Torres's voice came back, filtered through smoke and fear. I'm going to make sure they're too busy to chase you. He didn't wait for argument or protest, just moved back to his position and began planning how one man and a dog could hold the attention of a dozen armed hostiles, long enough for 14 civilians to escape into darkness and reach safety. The mathematics were impossible, but mathematics had never stopped him before. Marcus checked his weapon one final time, looked at Thor, whose amber eyes reflected firelight and absolute loyalty, and prepared to do what he'd done in Kandahar and Fallujah and every other place where good people needed someone willing to stand between them and evil. Ready? He asked Thor in German. The dog's response was a low growl that meant only one thing: always ready. Then let's finish this. Marcus stepped out from cover into the firelight, his weapon raised, and opened fire on the nearest vehicle with controlled precision that turned windshields into spiderweb destruction and set men scrambling for cover. Thor launched into the darkness in the opposite direction, his barking creating the illusion of multiple attack vectors, confusion in an enemy who'd expected a defensive posture. Behind Marcus, the church door burst open and 14 people ran into the night, heading for the tree line and safety, while the man who'd sworn to protect them drew fire deliberately, making himself the biggest target, the most pressing threat, the one problem that had to be solved before pursuing fleeing civilians. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 positions, bullets impacting stone around Marcus, with sharp cracks that sent shrapnel slicing through the air. He changed position, fired 3 rounds at a muzzle flash, heard a scream that confirmed a hit. Thor's snarling came from somewhere in the darkness, followed by another scream and the sound of someone going down hard. Victor's voice cut through the chaos, shouting orders in Russian and English. trying to impose control on a situation that had devolved from methodical assault to chaotic firefight. Forget the runners, kill the dog, kill Dalton, we sort the rest after. But the runners were already disappearing into forest darkness, and Marcus was moving between cover points with the efficiency of 15 years surviving in hostile fire. And 4 was a shadow demon, materializing to attack and vanishing before counterfire could track him. 30 seconds of engagement felt like 30 minutes, adrenaline distorting time perception, every detail hyper-vivid and simultaneously remote. Marcus reached his ammunition reload point, dropped the empty magazine, seated a fresh one with practiced efficiency that required no conscious thought. He'd trained these movements thousands of times until they became muscle memory. Automatic responses that functioned when higher brain functions were dedicated to survival calculations. A figure emerged from behind the nearest vehicle, rifle raised, and Marcus put 2 rounds center mass before the man could acquire his target. The figure dropped, and someone else was screaming, and 4 was barking with that combat fury that meant he'd engaged another target. Then headlights appeared on the access road, multiple vehicles approaching fast, with light bars flashing red and blue. Not Port Angeles PD in vehicles Marcus would recognize. These were Washington State Police cruisers, real law enforcement, responding to reports of gunfire and arson, arriving hours earlier than expected, because apparently Jake had connections Marcus hadn't known about. Victor saw them too, his voice cutting through the chaos with instant decision. "Fall back, everyone move, now." The attackers retreated to their vehicles with professional speed, abandoning wounded, leaving evidence, prioritizing escape over completion. Engines roared to life, tires spun on gravel, and the assault force scattered into multiple directions before state police could establish containment. Marcus lowered his weapon, his hands remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline crash beginning to hit his system. "Thor, Zilmir." The dog emerged from darkness, unhurt but breathing hard, and pressed against Marcus's leg with the solid warmth of a partner who'd just walked through fire and come out the other side. State police vehicles swarmed the parking lot, officers emerging with weapons drawn and lights cutting through smoke and darkness. A sergeant approached cautiously, his weapon lowered but not holstered, his expression suggesting he'd just walked into something far more complicated than a routine disturbance call. "Marcus Dalton?" the sergeant asked. "Yes. Special Agent Morrison said you might need assistance." Looks like he wasn't exaggerating. Marcus looked at the burning church, at the scattered evidence of combat, at the wounded attacker groaning near a vehicle, and felt the familiar weight of combat aftermath settling onto his shoulders. "The civilians?" "Secured by my officers in the tree line. All accounted for, no injuries reported." "Then we're good," Marcus said, and finally allowed himself to believe they might actually survive this. The fires burned through the night, but the people who mattered most had reached safety, and in the morning, federal justice would arrive with warrants and authority that even Garrett Blackwood couldn't buy his way out of. 3 months later, Marcus stood at the edge of the same coastal bluff where his cabin had been, watching gray waves roll endlessly against rocks that had witnessed a century of storms and would witness a century more. Thor sat at his side with the patience of a creature who understood that some moments required stillness rather than action, his amber eyes tracking seabirds that rode the wind with effortless grace. The cabin was gone now, burned to the foundation during Blackwood's final desperate attempt to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. But the land remained, and the view remained, and Marcus had decided that maybe destruction was just another word for the opportunity to rebuild something better on ground that had been tested by fire and proven solid. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from Jake Morrison, and Marcus smiled at the attachment before reading the text. A photograph showed Garrett Blackwood in orange prison jumpsuit, wrists shackled, being led into federal courthouse in Seattle for arraignment on 47 counts, ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to racketeering under the RICO statute. His empire had collapsed in spectacular fashion once federal investigators started pulling threads, revealing a network of corruption that extended to 3 counties and implicated 2 state senators who were now facing their own indictments. Jake's message read, "Trial starts next month. Prosecution has 17 witnesses, including 1 former homeless woman who's going to testify about 3 puppies and a man who decided standing up was more important than staying safe. You coming?" Marcus typed his response one-handed while scratching behind Thor's ears with the other. Wouldn't miss it. How's Victor? Cooperating fully in exchange for reduced sentence. Turns out loyalty to Blackwood only extended as far as the paychecks, and federal prison sounded better than life without parole. He's giving us details on 6 other operations in different states. Same pattern of targeting vulnerable populations during property acquisition. You opened a big door, brother. Marcus pocketed the phone and returned his attention to the ocean, processing the information with the same calm analysis he'd applied to mission debriefs for 15 years. Blackwood would spend the rest of his life in prison, his assets seized under civil forfeiture, his legacy transformed from successful developer to cautionary tale about unchecked greed. Victor would serve reduced time and likely be deported to face Russian charges he'd been avoiding. Chief Hendricks had resigned in disgrace and was cooperating with prosecutors to avoid his own prison term. Justice, in other words, was functioning exactly as designed when corruption couldn't sabotage it. A vehicle approached on the coastal road, a familiar pickup truck that parked near the property line. Elena emerged carrying a basket covered with cloth, her movements steadier than they'd been 3 months ago, her face showing color that came from regular meals and housing security rather than constant exposure and malnutrition. She'd gained 15 pounds, her hair was professionally cut, and she wore new clothes purchased with settlement money from a civil lawsuit against Blackwood Development that had been resolved for an undisclosed sum large enough to ensure she'd never be homeless again. I brought lunch, she called out, navigating the rough ground with careful steps. Father Torres sent his special tamales, and I made the rice the way my grandmother taught me in Guadalajara. Marcus helped her spread a blanket on ground that would someday support a new cabin, this one larger and designed with extra rooms for guests who might need temporary shelter. They'd talked about it during his visits to the apartment Father Torres had helped Elena secure, about creating something permanent from tragedy, about turning a defensive position into a sanctuary. Thor greeted Elena with gentle affection, accepting ear scratches before returning to his observation post. The dog had become something of a local celebrity after news coverage of the church siege. His image featured in articles about military working dogs and the bonds between veterans and their service animals. Multiple adoption requests had arrived for the 3 puppies, now healthy and thriving under Dr. Chen's care, but Elena had refused them all with polite firmness. They stay together, she'd insisted. They survive together, they should grow together. So all 3 puppies were being raised by Elena in her apartment, creating chaos and joy in equal measure, their survival a small defiance against a system that had tried to eliminate them as inconvenient obstacles to profit. As they ate lunch in comfortable silence, broken only by ocean sounds and distant bird calls, Marcus found himself thinking about the question Father Torres had asked during their last conversation. What now? You came here to escape, to forget, but you found purpose instead. So what does a warrior do when the war is over? Marcus had pondered that question through long nights when sleep remained elusive, had discussed it with Thor during their dawn patrols along the beach, had turned it over in his mind like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. The traditional answer was retirement, settling into civilian life, finding peace in routine and distance from violence. But Marcus had learned something during those desperate hours, defending a burning church full of people he barely knew. Peace wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the presence of purpose. He'd spent 15 years fighting enemies overseas, protecting people he'd never meet, preventing threats most Americans would never know existed. Coming home, he'd thought that chapter was finished, that his war-fighting skills had no application in a country governed by laws rather than tribal violence and religious extremism. The siege had proven him wrong. Evil existed here too, just wearing different uniforms and speaking more polished language, and people still needed protection from predators who'd learned to exploit legal systems and economic power instead of automatic weapons. I've been thinking, Elena said, breaking the comfortable silence, about the new cabin you're planning. You said it would have extra rooms. That's right. For who? You don't have family nearby, no wife or children that you've mentioned. So who are the extra rooms for? Marcus took a long drink of water while organizing his thoughts into words that would make sense outside his own head. People like you were 3 months ago. People who need temporary shelter, breathing room to figure out their next move. Not a homeless shelter exactly, But not a permanent housing solution either, something in between, a place to regroup. Elena studied him with eyes that had learned to read people during years of vulnerability on the streets. A mission, in other words. You're building yourself a forward operating base for a different kind of war. The military terminology coming from a woman who'd been a hospital housekeeper made Marcus smile despite himself. Been reading about military operations? Father Torres lent me books about Navy SEALs. Said if I was going to understand the man who saved my life, I should understand what made him. The books talked about how SEALs work in small teams from isolated bases, how they focus on precision operations rather than large-scale combat. You're going to do that here, aren't you? Small precision operations. Operations helping people who fall through society's cracks. Something like that, Marcus admitted. If I'm being honest, I don't know exactly what it looks like yet. But I know there are more Blackwoods out there. More systems failing people who deserve better. And I know I have skills that can help when normal channels don't work. A vigilante then? No. Marcus shook his head firmly. Vigilantes operate outside the law. I work with it, around it when necessary, but always with the goal of making legal justice function properly. What happened here worked because we gathered evidence, involved federal authorities, used the system against people who'd corrupted it. That's the model. Not revenge, not street justice, legitimate investigation and prosecution with some unconventional tactical support. Elena smiled, a knowing expression that suggested she heard what he wasn't saying. And when tactical support requires midnight infiltrations and combat operations, then I'll handle it the same way I always have, professionally, proportionally, and with full awareness that I'm accountable for every action. They finished lunch while discussing practical matters, construction timelines, building permits. Father Torres's offer to help coordinate with local contractors who'd been horrified by Blackwood's crimes and wanted to contribute to something redemptive. The conversation was comfortable. Two people who'd survived something terrible together and were now figuring out what came next. As Elena prepared to leave, she paused beside her truck and turned back to face Marcus. You know what I think? I think God brought you here, not just to save me and those puppies, but to save yourself. You were hiding from your own memories, your own pain. But fighting for someone else gave you permission to be the person you've always been. The protector, the warrior who stands when others can't. Marcus had no response to theology that might be accurate, so he simply nodded and watched her drive away. When the truck disappeared around the coastal bend, he returned to his contemplation of ocean and future. Thor pressed warm against his leg. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Dalton, my name is Jennifer Reeves. I'm a social worker in Olympia. Father Torres gave me your contact information. I have a situation involving a veteran facing illegal eviction and intimidation from a landlord with criminal connections. Father Torres said you might be willing to consult on the case. Can we talk? Marcus read the message twice, feeling the familiar sensation of purpose clicking into place like a magazine seating into a pistol grip. A veteran in trouble. Corruption and intimidation. A social worker who'd exhausted normal channels and needed someone who understood how to operate in spaces where regular rules didn't apply. He looked at Thor, who looked back with those amber eyes that had seen Helmand Province and Port Angeles and understood that their war had changed theaters but not ended. Looks like we're needed again, Marcus said quietly. Thor's tail wagged once, a simple affirmation that wherever Marcus went, whatever came next, they'd face it together the way they always had, as partners, as warriors who'd found their purpose not in distant wars against foreign enemies, but in protecting people at home who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus typed his response to Jennifer Reeves. Happy to help. When can we meet? The answer came within seconds. Tomorrow? This situation is escalating quickly. Tomorrow works. Send me details. He pocketed the phone and stood, stretching muscles that still remembered the church siege, still carried the physical memory of combat that came with every mission, regardless of whether it was Fallujah or a small Washington coastal town. The ache was permanent, a reminder of prices paid and battles survived, but it no longer felt like burden. It felt like authentication. Proof that he'd lived something real and meaningful. The sun was setting now, painting the ocean in colors that seemed impossible. and Marcus watched it with the appreciation of someone who'd seen enough darkness to value light without taking it for granted. Somewhere out there, people were suffering injustice they didn't deserve, facing threats they couldn't counter, trapped in systems that had failed them or been corrupted by people who valued profit over human dignity. And somewhere out there, Marcus would find them and stand between them and the darkness, because that's what warriors did when they finally understood that the most important battles weren't fought on foreign soil against identifiable enemies, but every day in their own communities against people who'd learned to weaponize law and economics against the vulnerable. "Time to go home," Marcus said to Thor, though he meant something different than returning to temporary housing in town. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a purpose. It was knowing that when duty called, when someone sent a message saying they needed help and normal channels had failed, he could answer. Because somewhere out there, a veteran was waiting for someone to stand up for them, the way Marcus had stood up for Elena and 3 puppies in the rain. And when that call came, Marcus Dalton would answer. Always. They walked back to the truck as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, warrior and dog moving in perfect synchronization, heading toward whatever came next with the calm certainty of people who'd finally figured out what they were meant to do. The war wasn't over, it had just changed, and Marcus was finally ready to fight it. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have walked away, or would you have stood and fought? Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say, "This far and no further." One person willing to stand when others can't. One person willing to believe that protecting the innocent is always worth whatever it costs, because somewhere out there right now, someone is waiting for a hero. And when duty calls, heroes answer. God bless you all, and remember, the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in moments when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things for those who have no voice, no power, and no hope, except for someone willing to care enough to fight. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never stop standing up for what's right.